Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland. This video is about women in science, gender equality, gender prejudice, well, various interrelated topics. And I'll tell you why this is topical. It's because about a week ago, an Italian scientist said that men made physics. His name is Professor Alessandro Strumia. I hope I pronounced it correctly. Now, in a sense, of course, he's correct, because until the 20th century, there were almost no women in science, and higher education in most countries was completely closed to women until the late 19th century. So the fact that women didn't create physics as a subject is not their fault. They were simply excluded from it. And there was a bogus notion until the late 19th century that the female mind couldn't cope with physics and things like that. Professor Strumia, he's at CERN. I can't remember what it is, like what it stands for, European Centre for Nuclear Research or something. I think it might be in French, which is why the acronym is in that order, and not the sequence where one would find the letters if the title of the organisation were in English. So Professor Strumia has been suspended for his remarks. But yes, it is true that men created physics. I mean, I know physics exists anyway. Before humans existed, there was physics, but as a subject. Now, I'm not responsible for it because I'd be the world's worst physicist, and there's some women who are outstanding at physics. So it touches on a broader question of why not so many women are in STEM subjects. That's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So many people see this as a problem, that men dominate STEM, and I certainly wouldn't be anywhere in STEM because I am useless at subjects of that nature. There's this evidenceless proposition that just as many women are good as men at STEM subjects. It would be equally foolish to assume that just as many boys are as good as girls at humanities subjects or languages. Why do people assume that? Why must it be the case that just as many women are outstanding at chemistry as men? Why does it have to be the case that just as many men are as good as women at Latin, for instance? So men and women are a little bit different. We obviously have slightly different DNA, and I'd say it's a well-evidenced fact that girls start to speak younger than boys, that women tend to have a broader vocabulary than men and spend more of their day speaking. But obviously we're talking about averages. There are exceptions. So I'm an unusually verbose male. So yeah, there are people who buck the trend, and there are women who are fantastic at physics or engineering, things like that. It's just more unusual. But is it because the way we're brought up, we're gendered? Now, to some extent that'll be true. It feeds into the broader nature-nurture debate. Now, surely any reasonable person would accept it's both. It's not nature or nurture. The question is, how much of it is nurture? How much of it is nature? Gender more broadly is like that. One of my psychiatrist friends was telling me the other day that much of gender is acted, right? That they're like secondary sexual characteristics, but what clothes you wear, how you behave, whether you have long hair, short hair, things like that. Much of that is really cultural. People are conditioned to believe this is how you behave. I remember years ago seeing a 2-year-old girl walking out of the supermarket with her mum, and she was holding a doll. And it struck me, that baby is already being prepared to have a baby. She's already being conditioned for motherhood. And it was a stunning moment of revelation for me. Perhaps I was foolish not to have hit upon this notion sooner, that as a male, when am I prepared for fatherhood? Never really. There's never a stage where people say, well, you must get ready for this and get used to the idea and start practicing even on a doll. So I do see how conditioning certainly exists, and some cultures might condition gender more intensively than others and say that the two genders are bifurcated, that they've got completely different roles, the public sphere, the private sphere, things like that. You'd find that in Shariat states in particular, for instance. So let's hear it for the boys. Well, looking at the educational statistics of the United Kingdom, that's the country with which I'm most familiar. And if you go back perhaps half a century, boys outperformed girls in almost every subject. And now it's the other way around. Girls tend to outperform boys in almost everything. Boys are only better on average at, say, physics, chemistry, IT. That's about it. And in things like modern languages or humanities subjects, girls tend to be way ahead. So that's that. And girls, the majority at university, things like that, which isn't a bad thing. But when boys are outperforming girls, people are terribly concerned about this. There must be something wrong. There must be gender discrimination, but not when it's the other way around. There's this foolish presumption of equality of outcome, that must be the right result, the only just outcome, and that's not necessarily so. How do we know that it must be the case that talents in all areas of accomplishment are equally distributed between the two genders? So I realize it can be because conditioning. People say, this is a boy subject, you should want to do this. Boy, here is your Lego set, or here is your remote control car to play with. I was given them, and I thought they were the most boring thing in the world. Well, that seemed to be completely tedious to me. I'd give it to a girl to play with, and I'd be into my books. And there are girls who be given dolls or whatever, or books and things like that, and think that these were completely dull and just drop them, and then they want to be playing with Meccano or something like that. So yeah, people don't have to follow the gender roles. There's nothing wrong with that, and gender roles shouldn't be completely separated, or maybe not even separated at all. But there is something in our DNA. It's not completely cultural. And if we are conditioned for different roles, why? Why is it that almost every culture, in almost every epoch, has done this? You'd think there'd be something more fundamental. So I've got no objection to women being in STEM subjects, to rising to the very highest level of that, to being professors, to getting Nobel Prizes. Nor do I take exception to males being in humanities or more female-dominated preserves. But I just think we shouldn't be terribly surprised if there's a gender imbalance. Imbalance is perhaps even a loaded term. Well, don't forgive the pun. We shouldn't expect it to be 50-50. So I really don't think there's much gender discrimination in Western countries, but almost none. And yet still, men and women, on the whole, gravitate a bit more to this subject or that, more to this career and that career. Women dominate many subjects, and for some reason, that's not a grave issue of concern for many people, particularly feminists. And it doesn't bother me one whit either. So we should put aside this foolish presumption that abilities in all areas of attainment are the same between the two genders. There's a difference. It might not be a large difference, actually, but we should no longer assume it must be 50-50. There might be that one gender on the whole is much better and one gender on the whole is much worse at something like that, and that's fine, and that's how our minds work. And it particularly contradicts the notion that gender is so fluid, that we can be transgender, that a man can declare himself to be a woman and has to be accepted as such, or a woman can declare himself to be a man. A lot of the ultra-liberal left people who are up in arms about there not being enough women or professors of physics and so on are the same people who say that the gender doesn't exist, that it's a completely cultural construct. You can go from one to another. So why do you care then if gender doesn't exist, that there are not many women who are professors of chemistry? All the men who are professors of chemistry could just call themselves women, carry on dressing as men, behaving exactly the same, if that's the case. If it's such a nonsense gender, why do you have this fixation with it? So it's daft. There's this bizarre and unhealthy obsession with gender and gender equality of outcome. I want gender equality of opportunity. And so when a professor, he cracks a joke, this quip about, oh, well, you fall in love with your female research students or things like that, I don't think that people should overreact and demand that his career be terminated. So I ask people to calm down, to examine these issues more soberly, and to achieve a bit more scientific objectivity and study data and evidence and not jump to conclusions. Some people, I think, their minds are befogged by ideology when it comes to these gender issues.